Renaissance. We're going to do the entire Renaissance period in an hour today, lots of caffeine. I hope you heard when you were coming in the difference between what you heard last week. So there's a significant sound change in sound from chant that you heard last week to the sort of lute and dulcimer solo stuff that you heard when you came in. Very typical Renaissance stuff. And the music that you have in your hot little hand, or you're next to somebody in their hot little hand. We're going to talk about that pretty soon. So what I want to talk about is what led to that change, because music reflects what's going on in the time period. Just like now. I mean, you can listen to the Beatles and enjoy the music if you don't know anything about the politics of the 60s or anything that went on. You can absolutely enjoy it. But if you know, then it makes a difference. It's responsive to the time period. And that's always been true. The music of the Renaissance was responsive to the time period. And the time period was like really cool. So you've got 1,000 years of the Middle Ages. Remember the Middle Ages last week? I mean, we talked about the Middle Ages. And we talked about the fact that there were 3 segments of society: clergy, nobility, and peasants. That's all there was. And who was running everything? Clergy. Clergy was running everything for all the reasons that we talked about. Okay. After 1,000 years, Renaissance. Renaissance means, you must know this, you're a room full of intelligent people, I can hardly tell you anything you don't know. What does it mean? Rebirth. Rebirth, that's right, that's right. My job here is done. Good night, everybody. See you next week. Yeah, I hate talking to smart people. It's not nearly as fun. That's not true. That's not true. I remember still, last lecture, I said something about Mahler, and how when you listen to Mahler, I just want to put a gun in my mouth. And at least half the people, the people just laughed and went, oh, this is such a great place to be. People have heard of Mahler. Anyway, so, after 1,000 years, rebirth of all the stuff we're going to talk about. So what led to the rebirth? Historians want to know. Really, 2 things. First of all, the plague. And not the COVID one, but the earlier plague, the 1350 plague. And you would say to yourself, well, how did the plague trigger the Renaissance? Well, it's because things were going to hell in a handbasket. I mean, in some countries, 50% of the people were dying. I mean, bring out your dead. Remember Monty Python, bring out your dead? Well, he's not dead yet. Well, he will be. So that's the whole bit if you're a Monty Python fan. Why would that? Well, it was because the people who had been flying the plane, right, the clergy, the church, had said, do this, do this, do this, and God will be happy and everything will be okay. And so everybody did those things, and God clearly was not happy. Things weren't okay, and people started looking around going, maybe all of the answers are not here. The other thing that triggered the Renaissance was information from Constantinople. Remember when Constantine started a new capital north of Rome? So a lot of literature went to Constantinople. And so when Rome fell, when Attila and his boys rode over the hill and sacked Rome, all of that information was lost. Well, a lot of it had been preserved, thank God, no pun intended, in Constantinople. And that stuff started sneaking, back in. By the way, the Huns were incredible people. When the Huns were after you, Attila and his boys, they rode horses. When they were chasing you down, they didn't take a break. They didn't stop for lunch. When Attila and his boys were riding, if they got hungry, I kid you not, they just reached back and cut a slice off the horse and ate that and kept right on riding. So you can imagine how the Roman toga guys went, stop, how that went. So, okay. Exploration. Lots of cool things in the Renaissance. Obviously, there's Columbus. Columbus sailed the blue in 1492. Yeah. So we have Columbus doing his thing. In the arts, it's
an Inquisition at the time.
Well, we're getting to that. We're getting to that. Religion. We haven't even gotten to religion yet. So Columbus is doing his thing. In the arts, oh my God. You can't swing a dead cat and not hit a great name. I mean, you've got Leonardo da Vinci, you've got Michelangelo, you've got Shakespeare. I mean, one of those in a lifetime would be amazing, never mind all of them. Michelangelo. Probably a lot of you have saw the, what was the Charlton Heston movie where he played Michelangelo? What was that name of that film?
The Agony of the Ecstasy.
Agony and the Ecstasy, thank you. Yeah, after the novel and so on and so forth. So we have sort of a contorted view of Michelangelo. Michelangelo was 5 feet 2 inches tall. And he weighed 100 pounds.
Wow. Wow.
He's a tiny little guy. He's a tiny little guy. Swung a mean hammer. Who was it the other day? I said, funny, on Facebook, someone said they did something. Oh, I can't even remember. There's great stories about Michelangelo, like when they unveiled the David and somebody said, oh, the nose is too big. And so he climbs back up the ladder and pretends to tap and drops dust out of his hand. And then goes back down the ladder and goes, how about now? He goes, perfect. That was Michelangelo. I could spend an hour on Michelangelo and his relationship to the Pope. You know, Michelangelo like ran from Rome. The Pope had him arrested and put in chains and dragged back and say, you know, paint the ceiling. How many of you have been to the Sistine Chapel? Probably a bunch of you. Yeah. Is that the most amazing art object I have ever been inside of in my life? And if you've seen it before they cleaned it and after, what a transition that was. The whole thing about paint in his eyes and, you know, lying on his back and silly stuff, because when you're painting frescoes, you're doing it on wet plaster. You don't stand still that long. I mean, think about that. It's one thing to paint a painting when you've got as long as you want. You don't have as long as you want. The wet plaster goes on, you got a few minutes. And you paint and you move on. It's astounding. Michelangelo forever. Science! So, toward the end of the Renaissance, actually beginning of the Baroque period, and all of this is relating to music, by the way, Galileo said something that really pissed the church off. What did he say? He said that the Earth is not the center of the universe, did Galileo say. Now, a couple of things about this amaze me. That any human being has the intelligence to figure this out by doing this. No. Someone said, isn't that amazing? I mean, really, you have to appreciate that. We take that for granted. Because, I mean, I got a phone that knows more stuff. But imagine, I mean, even, I started to say they were doing this, but actually the Greeks got to it first. You know that they were measuring, this just blows me away, this stuff. Do you know that if you have 2 sticks, and you know exactly how long these sticks are, and you put one stick in Easttown and the other stick in Phoenix, and at exactly noon you measure the shadows, and you can do a calculation that will give you darn close about how big the world is. I just like, you have got to be kidding me. So anyway, Galileo, just by looking up, figures out that the Earth is not the center of the universe, and he goes and tells the church, and the church says, well, that's not true, because clearly it says it is in the Bible. Yeah. So Galileo gives them a telescope, which he did not invent, but he's throwing it in front of him. He goes, no, look, I can show you. And they go, no, take it away, it's evil, it's evil. And in fact, the church said to Galileo, you take it back, or we'll kill you.
Yeah. Right.
So what did he do? He took it back. He wasn't an idiot. I mean, he was smart. He took it back. Now, he did ask the church, he said, tell you what I'll do. I'll write a book that says, here's the Copernican view. Because Copernicus said this 70 years earlier, and the church just ignored it because it was so outrageous. So Copernicus, he said, I'll write a book, and I'll say, here's the Copernican view, here's the church view, and I'll say I believe the church view. And the church said, okay, you can do that. He wrote the book, that's what he said, nobody believed him, they did, yeah, no. And so Galileo spent the rest of his life under house arrest. The rest of his life. That's the time period we're living in, and that's important to remember when we get to the music. Do you know when the church finally forgave Galileo?
1973.
They did not admit they were wrong. They just forgave. They had a meeting. I kid you not. They had a meeting. They got together. They looked at the evidence, and they forgave him in 1992. Wow. Isn't that interesting? You see, that's... I just love stuff like that. That's the kind of thing when I look at the news, I go, oh, that's cool. That's really funny. Okay. Technology, the printing press. Imagine what the printing press did for music. The printing press did for music what digitizing music did. Everybody knew, everybody with any sense knew that as soon as you digitize music, it's game over. You can't sell performances anymore because they're too easy to access. As soon as I have it here, I can send it to everybody in the world. That's it. See, once upon a time, you made money selling recordings. Those days have gone the way of the dial phone. I mean, that's over. Now, where do you make money as a performer? There are 3 places you make money as a performer. You know? Live concerts, which ironically, you used to lose money on live concerts to sell recordings. That's why you made that's why you did live shows. Nobody made any money on them because they were too expensive. You did them to sell albums. Now you make money on live shows, merchandise, and rights, owning your own music. It's why Taylor Swift owns her own music. You know, Paul McCartney couldn't even buy back the Beatle catalog from Michael Jackson, right? The Colonel sold off Elvis's catalog for, I can't remember, when Elvis died, he was worth $5 million. Isn't that astounding? I mean, the king, seriously, the king, $5 million, because he had a manager that, I won't even get into that. We'll talk about that. But the catalog, that's where money comes from. Well, once you start printing music, now, who knows who that was? It's maybe me. Now all bets are off. See, once upon a time, the composer had the only copy. There was only one copy of everything, and the composer had it. So when you wanted to do a chorale by Bach, you called Bach. You didn't go to the library. I mean, Bach had all the music, and so on and so forth. It's also why in this early music there is very little instruction written on the page. Why write dynamics or tempo or breath marks or any of that stuff? I'm going to be there. Right? If you're the composer, plus you're writing it out by dipping a feather in a bottle of ink. So the less you can put on the page, not only is it faster, but it doesn't tear the paper. And it doesn't wear out as fast. So you don't want to be ink heavy on the page. Now you can print music. Oh my God. Which is a huge lack of control for the composer. Because now, once it's printed, I can disseminate. Now, I can't disseminate it all over the world instantly, but all over Europe. Once I got a copy, then I can print it, I can sell it, I can use it. I don't have to pay anybody anything, because let's face it, there's no computers keeping track of that sort of stuff. So it was kind of good news, bad news. By 1575, there were multiple copies of it. You could get music pretty easily. So by the middle of the 1500s, music was pretty readily available in printed form. All right, theology. We talked a little bit about here. And now, huge impact on music. Martin Luther. Remember I mentioned Martin Luther and working for the Catholics and doing the whole thing. Okay, Martin Luther was a priest, as you know, 95 Theses, Wittenberg door. Martin Luther had some issues with the church. The church was doing some unusual things. One could go on. Indulgences. Indulgences, the church sold indulgences to raise money to build St. Peter's. Anybody, you've been to St. Peter's? It's magnificent. They did a great job. Don't get me wrong. The place is pretty impressive. I like going in there. Indulgences were forgiveness for sins. So if you're a Catholic and you sinned, you wanted to be forgiven as soon as possible, because if you die with unforgiven sins, it's not good for you in the hereafter. So to be forgiven, you have to go to a priest, ask for sin, blah, blah, blah. But there wasn't a priest in every town. So you have all these little villages and towns and stuff popping up, and there's no church and there's no priest. So the church says, tell you what we're going to do. We'll come through with our little horse and cart once a week, and we will sell you 3 forgivenesses for $1. I kid you not. We will sell you 3 forgivenesses for $1. You can buy them in advance, and then once you've sinned, you just tear them up. Great system. It does mean who gets to sin the most. Rich people. It's just like today. You see, some things do not change. P. Diddy. Some things do not change. So Martin Luther said, I don't know, that seems a little wonky. Certainly there were problems with the Pope. At one point, as most of you probably know, there were 3 popes at one time. There was one in the south of Italy, one in the north of Italy, and one in France. You have popes like the Borgias, appointing their own kids as cardinals. Martin Luther took sort of a dim view of that. Oh, one of my favorite Pope stories. The guy was running for Pope and he didn't win. The College of Cardinals went the other way. I'm really getting to music, but this is too fun. It went the other way, and another guy won. So the guy who wanted to be Pope grabbed the robe, the Pope's robe, put it on, ran up to the altar in the Sistine, and sat down in the chair and said, I'm Pope. And everybody went, no, we elected the other guys. He goes, look at the rules. First person with the robe in the chair is Pope. Yep. Son of a bitch. Yeah, so fun stories. If you haven't read, and I'm not banging on the Catholic Church, I mean, let's face it, any organization, human beings, and blah, blah, blah. My point is that with the Reformation, obviously the Catholic Church asked Martin to go and start his own religion. Which is interesting, because Luther did not want to leave the church. Let's be clear about that. He wanted to reform it. But they said, no, we insist you leave the church. So he left, and now we have Lutherans, right? And Baptists, and Methodists, and Presbyterians, and all of those other churches. What does that mean to music? If there's only one church, how does the music sound?
Same.
Like the same. It's all chants all the time. But once you have a multitude of churches, right? Now you have a variety of music. We're getting to that. The other thing that happened is that as the church got weaker, who got stronger?
Not the peasants.
Not the peasants. Nobility got stronger. Nobility filled the gap. Because the church couldn't control property anymore. They were hemorrhaging money, they were fighting wars, and blah, blah, blah. So the nobility got stronger. What do people want to do with their money after they eat and shelter? Entertainment. Entertainment. So it's food, it's shelter, it's entertainment. The nobility are now spending a ton of money hiring musicians and writing new music. So the explosion of music in the Renaissance came because, among other things, of the deterioration of the church, among other things. It didn't hurt, by the way, that Henry VIII, that there was some issues between Hank and the church. Hank wound up starting his own religion because he wanted something he couldn't get from the Catholic Church. What was that? A divorce, yeah. Because his wife, kept having girls, and obviously it was her fault. She had it last. So he wrote, literally, we have the letter. He wrote to the Pope and said, I need a divorce. And the Pope wrote back and said, it's hysterical. I know you're king. You probably didn't read the fine print, but we don't believe in divorce. Love the Pope. And Henry gets the letter and he goes, no. He writes back and he goes, no, I read the fine print. You probably just didn't see my name at the bottom of the letter where it says, Henry, King of England. And the Pope gets that and he goes, no, I saw it. I got it. No, but no divorce because I'm God. Or at least I speak for him. So what did Henry do? Started his own religion. He threw all the Catholics out. He absorbed all of the church, all of the finances, all of the art, all of the thing. And P.S. by the way, I'm divorced now. He cut off a few heads in the interim, but that's beside the point. Okay, now, music. What does all this mean in music? A bunch of things. In the Renaissance, there is massively more variety. than there was in the Middle Ages. And there's more variety because there are more people sponsoring and paying for it, and more people looking for entertainment. That's why there's more variety in the Renaissance. In the Renaissance, it's the last period where sacred and secular music sound almost exactly alike. There's no real difference. So if you were a composer and you wrote a sacred piece of music and you wanted to sell it down at the Village Green on Saturdays, you just gave it new words. Same thing went the other way. If you wrote a piece, you know, sing around the campfire and so on and so forth, 99 bottles of beer on the wall, you needed to make it, you just add in new words. Jesus loves you very much, yes he really does, take him down, pass him around. That's going to be on tape somewhere. Bach used drinking songs, we all know that. Bach used drinking songs in his cantatas. Do you know why? He did it because people would listen. So he took drinking melodies, he put them in the bass line, so people would go, hey, I was singing that last night. That's really cool. Bach was doing that. So there's a lot of crossover there. Now, one of the really cool things, and we're about to get into this. Do you remember when I talked about the difference, this is like years ago now, between homophonic music? Remember music, everything does the same thing, same time? 99% of all music today is homophonic, right? It has a melody line and everything moves like that. As opposed to polyphonic music. In the Renaissance, here's what composers would do. Look what I can do with this cool new board. It's a miracle. All right. In the Renaissance, what composers would do is write one line of music and then rewrite it in as many ways as they could think of. That's essentially what polyphony is. So for example, you can make a canon out of it. So here's my line of music, like row, row, row your boat. Not what this is, but let's say I'm doing row, row, row your boat gently down, right? One way to make it polyphonic is to sing the same line of music, but just one section starts later. Yeah. Row, row, row your boat, row, row, row. Now, it's polyphonic at that. Another way to do it, I love this one, is to write it in inversion. So inversion, when you invert a piece of music, you take your original line, and if it goes up 3 notes, you just write it down 3 notes. And if it goes up another 3, you write it down 3. And if it goes down 1, you write it up 1. So this line does exactly the opposite in terms of direction that the first line does. That's called inverting it. Turn the music upside down. You can also augment it, which means you would write the music in slow motion. So rather than half notes, you would make all of these whole notes. So you would sing the line in exactly half the time that it takes this line. Or you would speed it up in diminution. You would write it in quarter notes. So rather than row, row, row your boat, you might write it row, row, row. Or you might write row, row, row your boat gently down to right. Now, here's what would happen. A composer would write a line like that. He would augment it, diminution, inversion. He'd write a line like that. And then he would put all of those lines together, and that would be the piece. And it's one of the reasons that Renaissance music sounds so odd to our ears. Because they did not care how this sounded like we do. We are very harmonically oriented. We want the piece to sound in a given moment good, either major, minor, or whatever. Renaissance, they didn't care how it sounded this way. They cared how it sounded this way. So if you've got 10 lines of music, how does this line sound? How does this line sound? How does this line sound? And if all of the lines sound good, then they must sound good at the same time. And that's why when you hear it, not the stuff so much I'm going to play for you today, but that's why you hear it, it sounds jumbled and out of whack and like, where is this going, and uncertain. That's the reason, is because they weren't writing this way. See, when Bach writes, he writes a bass line and then he stacks the notes up. I mean, Bach's kind of writing, not entirely, but go with me here. Most composers now are writing, you know, this way. They're writing in moments that are stacked. Renaissance composers didn't do that. They wrote whole lines of music, and then they wrote whole lines of music, and then they put them together. And it's why the music sounds so odd to us. Eventually this changes and so on and so forth. There were instruments. They weren't very good. Instrumental range and vocal range were almost exactly the same. It was about an octave. Julie Andrews would have been wasted in the Renaissance with her 3-octave range. Ema Sumac. Anybody know Ema Sumac? Yeah, oh my God, I love this room. Ema Sumac, 5-octave range, maybe, who knows. Kid from Boston, we can't tell. But anyway, wasted because it was about an octave. Because the instruments weren't that good. And most of the instruments that there were mimicking voices anyway. So you have a lute, you have a dulcimer, you know, whatever. It's not, the instruments are not all that terribly elaborate. And again, composers are rarely indicating, in some pieces they did not even indicate which instruments they wanted to play. They just wrote lines. I mean, Bach frequently did that. He just wrote lines. Handel did that, even Messiah. He just wrote lines. And then you see who shows up. I mean, seriously, who's the best player? You know, I wrote this for cello. Oh, you're terrible. You play this. You know, I'll rewrite it for this. So yeah, there's very little, sometimes there's very little information. So, for example, as a conductor, when I pick up a piece of Renaissance music and I look at the editorial markings, I take all those with a grain of salt. I mean, I can change rudder and feel guilty. But changing a Renaissance composer, I don't lose any sleep over that, because nobody knows what they wanted anyway. All right, now, a couple of composers, 2 or 3 composers I want to talk about. The first one, well, they're all dead. Thomas Tallis. I mentioned Thomas Tallis only so I can show you this piece of music right here. Thomas Tallis and William Byrd, you probably know William Byrd. Tallis and Byrd had a 21-year monopoly of printing music in Great Britain, granted to them by Henry VIII. The way you make money if you're a king is you grant a monopoly. There aren't 100 coffee companies, there's only one. You are the national coffee company. Anybody who wants coffee must buy from you, and I'm in for half. That's how it works, right? So Tallis and Byrd had a 21-year monopoly. If you wanted to print music, if you even wanted to buy music paper, you had to get it from Tallis or William Byrd, which is why we have so much music by Tallis and Byrd from the Renaissance. But I want to show you this piece. The only reason I mention Tallis is this piece. Look at this cool piece. Get you a really interesting page, like you can see it from where you are. Whoa. This is a motet, very famous motet actually, in 40 parts. Wow. This is for 8 choirs of 5 voices each. Whoa. So when you sing this piece, and by all means come up and take a look at it. You don't sing this piece this way. You sing this piece this way. It's every single line is happening at the same time. 40 lines of music. And by the way, it's for solo voices. So 40 singers. 40 singers in 8 choirs moving this direction. And if you get lost, you turn to the end and you just keep singing Amen until everybody else is singing Amen. It's really a cool piece. You can look it up. There's a number of recordings of it. But yeah, this is how elaborate it got. Which is why I hasten to point out that in most of life, throughout human history, things get more and more and more and more and more and more complicated. In music, they got more. They got more and more and more and more complicated, simple, 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 simple.
Yeah.
So we are much simpler now than this. Music does not follow the same course that many other art forms, and certainly technology does. Okay, take a look at this piece by Thomas Weelkes. I want to tell you about Thomas Weelkes. I want to tell you about madrigals. In the Renaissance, if you were nobility, you were expected to be able to play an instrument or sing and or dance. You were expected to be a self-entertaining unit, or you did not get invited to the party. I mean, that was part of your training. You needed to be able to entertain, or you were useless. I mean, seriously, you had no value if you had no talent. So, the nobility, among other things, would sing madrigals. When the nobility would sing madrigals, this is a madrigal, it was not printed this way. Madrigal books, imagine that there's a table here in front of me. Let's reduce it to soprano, alto, tenor, bass. Here's the book. The soprano line faces this way. The tenor line faces this way. The alto line faces this way. The bass line faces this way. We sit around the table and we sing at each other. I do not know what you're going to sing. It's not like what you have in your hand. See, if I'm a tenor, I can look and see what the sopranos are doing. Not this way. I don't know what the sopranos are doing until it gets put together. It's a puzzle, and you need X number of other people to put the puzzle together. It's really cool. So the music is facing in 4 different or 6 different or 8 different directions, and then you sing this page, and then you flip it, and it's a new page of systems all facing in separate directions. Okay? Keep that in mind. This piece is called As Vesta Was From Latmost Hill Descending. This is a very typical madrigal of the Renaissance. It also is a superb example of a wonderful thing which frequently gets lost on modern audiences called word painting. It's when the music does what the words say. Vesta was the Roman goddess Diana. So, as Vesta was from Latmost Hill descending, as the Roman goddess Diana is coming down the hill, she spied a maiden queen going up the hill. The maiden queen was Queen Elizabeth, right? Who assumed the throne, the Elizabethan queen. So, here's Thomas Weelkes sucking up big time to the queen. This is a very political madrigal. Here is the goddess descending, growing weaker. Here is the queen going up the hill, getting stronger, right? Attended on by all her, I'm now on top of page 3, attended on by all the shepherds and the swain, to whom Diana's darlings, this is middle of 3, to whom Diana's darlings came running down amain. In other words, all of the people who are dancing around the goddess leave the goddess and go dance around the queen. Suck up, suck up, suck up. Came running down the main. First 2 by 2, then 3 by 3, and so forth, all together mingling with the shepherds. Okay, that's what this piece is about. It's a suck up to the queen. Now, take a look at the first page. There's, for those of you that know, this is in 6 parts. We got a couple of sopranos and now a couple of tenors and a bass. Notice in about the 4th measure, for those of you that read music, and if you don't, just point to the person. As Vesta was, and this is in the alto alone, descending. What does the line do? It descends. That's an example of word painting. The composer takes the word descending and he writes a descending line. Okay? Turn over on page 2. Spied a maiden queen ascending. What does the line do? It goes up, right? Okay. Then, on page 3, and you will hear this when I play it for you easier than it came running down a main. You will notice that the notes go from quarters to eighths. So what you're going to hear is running down the main, running down the main. But he makes the singers run in effect, musically. Go over on page 4. Bottom of page 4. First 2 by 2. See in the bottom line, the words first 2 by 2? In those lines, there's 2 parts singing. And then 3 by 3, there are 3 parts singing. And so on and so forth. Now, we look at this, we go, yeah, that's it. But remember, you don't know this. You're sitting around the table. You don't know what anyone else is going to do until you hear it. So you sit there and you go, let's say you're the, you're the second soprano, the alto, and you go, first 2 by 2, and there's 2 of us singing, oh, that's so cute, that's really great. Then 3 by, oh, 3 by 3, let's sing it again. Because what else did they have to do? I remind you, all right? Now, over on bottom of page 6, long live fair Oriana, which is another name for the queen. Long live fair Oriana. Look at the word long in the bottom of page 6. It's the longest note in the piece. The word long sounds like this. Long. Which would be the joke if you're reading it off the page. And remember, they're sitting around reading this off a page. Madrigals were entertainment for nobility. This was not written to be performed for an audience. Madrigals now, you put together a madrigal group and you sing and an audience goes blah, 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 blah. That's not what madrigals were. Just like chant wasn't for entertainment, except for, God. But madrigals were entertainment for the singers. At some point, and I can tell you exactly when it happened, and we'll get to this. I can almost give you the date. It's the day that we sold more recordings than copies of music. There is a time, and we will get to it, when people stopped making their own music and started paying someone else to make it for them. Wow. Wow. What a cataclysmic sociological change that is. And we can't really appreciate that because in all of our lives, for the most part, most human beings on the planet buy their entertainment from other people. They don't make it themselves anymore. That's too bad. It really is. It's too bad. Because I think there's great joy in making your own music. Listen to this. Listen to this piece from the beginning. Imagine that you're sitting around the table. Here's how it Page 2. First 2 by 2. Then 3 by 3. Together. Top of 5. All alone. One voice. then sang. Long live Ferroriana. Is that cool?
Yes.
Now, you were expected to be able to do that. Really, if you weren't a peasant, if you were nobility, you were expected to be able to do that. That was part of your training. Sit down, sing this piece. Pretty amazing, really, when you think about it. That was the common expectation that you be able to do that. And that's just in 6 parts, not 40. Imagine. By the way, Thomas Tallis, I don't think I mentioned. Thomas Tallis was the first composer who ever set English words to a religious text. Isn't that amazing? There's a great piece of trivia. It obviously was in Latin, it obviously was in Italian, it was always in German. First composer to ever write anything religious in English, Thomas Tallis. Really cool. And yet, who knows him today? All right, I want to talk about the most significant composer in the Renaissance was Giovanni Palestrina. Beyond question, Palestrina was Renaissance God. He was the greatest composer of Renaissance Catholic music. Giovanni was born in the town of I'm going to play some music for you. I have to hurry up. He was born in Palestrina. That's why he took the name of the town. His last name was really Pierluigi. His name was Giovanni Pierluigi. But he took the name of the town because he was very proud of where he was born. The bishop of Palestrina, the church bishop of Palestrina, loved Giovanni and hired him at the church and loved his music and was just crazy about it. The bishop eventually became pope. You know, if you can't do well yourself, I always want my friends to do well. And that's what happened with Giovanni, because he brought Giovanni to Rome, to the Vatican, and made him the king music guy, which was absolutely frowned upon because Giovanni was married. And if you weren't, even if you were a civilian working in the Vatican those days, it was, you were not married. But Giovanni had a family, and the Pope said, I don't care. I'm the Pope. So he brings Giovanni and he hires him. Giovanni Palestrina gets credit. This is kind of like George Washington chopping down the tree. It's kind of true. Giovanni Palestrina gets credit for saving polyphonic music. Because at the Council of Trent, you might know what the Council of Trent was? The Council of Trent was the Counter-Reformation. So when Luther starts the Reformation, the Catholic Church gets together and decides to have a meeting to figure out what to do to stem this horrible tide. So they have the Council of Trent. And one of the things they want to do is it's T-R-E-N-T. And it goes on, this meeting goes on for about 5 years. One of the things that they want to do is, I kid you not, go back to singing chant. At the Council of Trent, who did they blame for all their problems? I kid you not, this is so true. They did not blame Luther, they blamed musicians. They said, it's this damn polyphonic music Because when you're singing no polyphonic music, nobody can understand the words. Well, they're right. There's no arguing that. One of the problems with polyphonic music, there are two problems. It's the reason we don't do polyphonic music anymore. There's two problems with to sing polyphonic music, you have to be a musician. You have to be able to read music, or you can't sing it. The other problem is you can't understand the words. If you want to tell a story, if you want to write a love song, if you want anybody to understand what you're doing, this won't work. It won't. You have to write this. And that's why we don't do polyphonic music now. Those two reasons. So at the Council of Trent, the council said, we need to throw polyphonic music out and go back to singing chant. Palestrina was the music director. So he wrote pieces that started off every meeting in a polyphonic style. And the way he did it, so little time, sorry Sam, I'll fix the wall. So what he did, the way Palestrina wrote it, and if you look at Palestrina's music, he writes, the sopranos sing, Ave Maria, right? And then sopranos, altos, tenors, and basses go, Ave Maria, Ave Maria, Ave Maria, Ave Maria, Ave Maria, Ave Maria. And then he stops, and then he has the tenors sing, Grazia plena. And then everybody goes, Grazia plena, Grazia plena, Grazia plena. So he wrote polyphonic music so people could understand the words. And Palestrina, I kid you not, gets credit for saving polyphonic music and not sending us back quite literally 1,000 years to do all chant all the time. Yeah, it's really cool. All right. The Pope dies. The next Pope comes in, and he requires celibacy. So he fires Palestrina. No, Palestrina goes, okay, okay. So Palestrina leaves. His wife dies. Palestrina marries a very, very rich widow who was in the fur trade, actually. And so now he's extremely wealthy. That Pope dies. The third Pope comes in. He goes, you know, music around here sounds like crap now. It was better, kid you not, it was better when Palestrina was here. Get him back. So Palestrina comes back, and he finishes out his life working at the Vatican. He is so popular and so significant. Oh, good, I can play a piece of Palestrina for you. He is so significant and so popular that when he dies, they bury him in the music chapel. They honor him, they bury him in the music chapel. When they remodeled the chapel, they forgot to mark where he was buried. And they have lost him. He is buried in the Vatican somewhere. No one knows where. I'm sure he wanders the halls. You see, that's the kind of thing that makes history just really interesting for me. The fact that we don't know where Mozart is buried, there's a whole other story there. But we don't know where Palestrina is buried. We used to know, but they forgot to do an X when some construction company, you know, tore the place apart and didn't mark it yeah. So now they don't know where he is.
It was pre-GPS.
Yes. So let me play some. I will finish this. I'll play some Palestrina music for you, just because it's darn pretty. Here we go. See how he starts one line at a time? It was written, which is to say a building with a 20-second reverb. So if you like the music on Sunday, you can come back on Monday and hear it again. Imagine the overtones. And it goes on for about 20 seconds. I mean, you've been in places like that. I have. I've been in places that had a 10 to 20 second reverb. I want to mention very briefly Giovanni Gabrielli. Gabrielli was the music director at in Venice, at St. Mark's in Venice, isn't it? That was the #1 music position in the country, was Gabrielli, and his uncle was there before him, and so on and so on. Gabrielli was the king of antiphonal music. So what Gabrielli did in this acoustic environment is that he put choirs here. This is, the cross is the, obviously cathedral thing, right? He put a choir here. He put a choir here. He put a choir up here in front of the altar. He did more than that, actually. But he would do 4 choirs at a time in each corner. He doubled all the choirs with brass, so the singers didn't get lost. Can you imagine how that sounded? So he would do 4, 5, and 6 choir pieces around the building. He'd stand here and do that. Can you imagine how that sounded? That's Gabrielli. Giovanni Gabrielli. I'm talking to Steve Albeck and Turtleback to see if Orcas Choral can't do Gabrielli music in the spring after we do the Rudder Requiem and put some choirs up in the balcony and double it with brass. That's a blatant commercial for our spring concert. I'll see you Wednesday. We'll talk about the Baroque period.